thank you so much for joining us for our series of virtual in-conversation events. We are incredibly grateful to all of the creatives and artists who shared their time, their wisdom, and their experience with us. It's easy to ask in the face of a global pandemic, why do the arts matter? But the truth is that theatre is as old as civilization itself. It's a place where we learn, we explore, and we share our common humanity. It's a pressure valve for society, a safe space in which to explore dangerous ideas. And above all, it's entertaining. At Dark Unicorn Productions, we rely very heavily on the support of our wonderful patrons to continue our work. You can join them and become a patron of the arts yourself by joining our scheme, which starts at just £50 per year to become a rainbow unicorn. Be part of the Dark Unicorn family. Be part of the recovery and the future of theatre. Don't let the lights go out. Become a patron today. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to Dark Unicorn in Conversation. My guest today is Deb Olin Unferth, an author of no mean talent and achievement, with work spanning short stories, novels, and memoir. Her work has been featured everywhere from the New York Times and Harper's to Esquire and heavyweight literary journal Granta. She is a multiple winner of the Pushcart Prize, a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a finalist for a National Book Critics Circle Award for her 2012 memoir, Revolution. In addition, she is the recipient of the Governor of Texas's Criminal Justice Service Award for her pioneering work as the founder and director of the Penn City Writers, a 2-year college-level creative writing certificate program for inmates at a maximum security prison in southern Texas. Her latest novel, Barn 8, which is about a madcap plot to liberate close to 1 million chickens from an industrial-scale egg farm, has been described as enthralling by The Guardian and beautiful, urgent and politically charged by the New York Times, as well as countless superlatives by Dark Unicorn's executive director Eleanor Sturton, herself, as some of you will know, the proud custodian of a small coop of hens rescued from similar work. We were delighted that Deb took the time to talk to us from her home in Austin, and we started off by discussing her love of rural America. Deb, it occurs to me that with several of your works, I'm thinking not only of Barn 8, of which much more later, but also Vacation and your memoir, Revolution, there's a slight motif of fleeing a sense of home in the hope of discovering a sense of truth almost, often in sort of the wider open spaces. Obviously this isn't it's not a new thing, but does it speak to a love of yours for those sort of quirks and vagaries of rural existence, and especially rural America in the case of Barn 8?
I'm from Chicago, which is obviously a big city, but it's situated right in an area that is all very rural. And now I live in Texas, but I'm in Austin, which is a city, but I'm surrounded by vast rural areas. And I've lived in Alabama. I've lived in all of these places where I'm surrounded by big rural areas. And I think that the expanse has been very inspiring to me. There's a long history, of course, a long literary and film history of hitting the open road. And that isn't really the kind of thing that I write, but I do write about being in that space a lot, especially in Barn 8, but also being crowded in that space. So in Barn 8, for example, there's, I write a lot about these chickens, about farms, and how there are so many beings pressed into these very small spaces, these giant warehouses that hold, 150,000 chickens. But I also think a lot about how the cities as well are so concentrated. And then in the United States, we just have vast open spaces where very few people live. And that's gotten, that's becoming very complicated politically here.
There's also, isn't there, that sense of the strange dichotomy you get of the ability to feel incredibly lonely in a huge expanse, heavily populated expanse, and yet find tremendous community in much more sparsely populated areas. I've read interviews with you where you talk about the political discourse in your home growing up, but were the arts a feature of your upbringing as well?
I would say that I got interested in the arts probably in college and after college. When I was growing up, although my grandparents were interested in the arts, but my parents really weren't. My dad was interested in politics and history, and they were very interested in us knowing Spanish and being engaged politically in different ways. So I think that was my primary focus when I was growing up. But then as I got older and I went to college and I studied philosophy as an undergraduate, and then my aunt is an art historian, and I started spending a lot of time with her, and she began teaching me a little bit about art, and then I started reading a lot. And so that's kind of really, it was my 20s that I fell in love with literature and art.
And I mean, that along with politics is explored quite a lot with your memoir Revolution. You discuss the many and varied life lessons you learnt during for anybody who hasn't read it, during a sort of earnest late teenage period where you and your boyfriend ran off to Nicaragua to attempt to help the Sandinistas. You wrote this following quite a gap between the events and writing, obviously, but did you find when you were writing it that period is still teaching you lessons which you're still learning?
Yeah, definitely. Do you mean the period that I was in Central America?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a kid, my grandmother had a house in Mexico that she lived in, and we would go and stay with her. And so I wound up learning Spanish. When we would go to school, I went to school in Mexico on and off for many years. And so I learned Spanish. And so and actually I went to El Salvador and Nicaragua when I was a little girl with my parents. So then when I got older and dropped out of college to try to get involved in the revolutions of Central America, it already felt familiar to me, the location, the place. And so it was already so much a part of who I was and my upbringing that so then when I came back and was studying philosophy and later art, that part of the world was still very much a part of my entire life. Like, it never went away. And so then when I started going back later, wanting to write about it, it just felt like I was coming home in some way. It didn't feel, it felt like I had left home, kind of, and now I was coming back. So for a long time, I felt like my life sort of straddled the two worlds a little bit. I feel less that way now, because now I've been here in the United States for so long. But the politics never really went away. The politics have always continued to be a big part of my life. And in terms of social service, like I run this prison program here in Texas, and that came directly out of my childhood and then my young adulthood. It's just always been a big part of my life.
Because also, I mean, it was you came from what was certainly from what I've read of your upbringing, what was on one level a politically a bipartisan household, if you like. You were both, as a politically divided household. Your father identified as a Republican. You and your mother were more democratically inclined. Your brother identified as a libertarian. Am I right in saying all this? Have I misread?
Whoa, you have done your research. Wow. Wow. I don't think my husband could say all of that. Um,
um,
well,
I,
my my father was a Republican when I was growing up, but he actually, when they moved to Arizona,
mm,
and they passed these crazy anti-immigration laws,
mm,
and it just really pissed my dad off. And he was like, this country is built on immigration, and since my dad had spent so much time in Mexico and Central America, he took it really personally, and he started protesting. It was so crazy what happened, because he was just watching on TV all these protesters. I was there in Arizona visiting, and he was watching them at the Capitol, and he was like, I just feel like going down there and protesting with them. And he was like 70 at that point and a Republican.
mm.
And I was like, Dad, let's go. So we went down there, and it was all very young people. They were all Latinx. There weren't any white people at this point. And my dad, my 70-year-old white dad, showed up, and they thought that he was a counter protester. So they were like yelling at him, and I was like, hey, no, he wants to be with you. And it was the weirdest thing. So they just invited him over, and he walked over there, and they gave him a sign, and he was like standing there with it. And it was like his whole life changed. It was this radical thing. Like, he started protesting every single day, and then he started going to meetings, and then he started knocking on doors, and then he started this this group to like help people become citizens. And he started this like boycott thing, and he was working, like, he had retired, but now he was working like 80 hours a week on this. I mean, it was insane. And and at one point he was standing there, and he was like, he was in one of the meetings, and they were talking about, I don't know, Republicans or something, and they said, well, you're a Democrat, right? And he just didn't say anything. And they looked at him, and they said, well, you're an independent, right? And he just stood there, and he was like, actually, I'm a registered Republican. But now he's not. Now he's a Democrat. But so he had this big transition.
It's never too late to have that moment, is it? The Obviously that sort of level of social conscience and liberation, really, sensual, is explored in a sense in Barnate, your most recent novel, for which congratulations, wonderful piece of work, and also I have to say, its success even more potent for it being, I mean, effectively released during the current pandemic. Is that right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
sort of right at the start. What drew you to poultry as a means of telling that story?
So I know, isn't it funny? So I have been a vegan for like maybe 13 or 14 years. I don't know, 15, something like that. I've been a vegan for a long time. And when I became a vegan, the thing that was hard to give up, it was hardest. It was actually very hard for me to become a vegan. Vegans always talk about how it's so easy. Actually, now it's easy after all these years. But the hardest thing for me originally to give up was eggs. But I kept reading about how actually layer hens are the worst treated animal. And so I always it was so important to me to do that. And so I think I put in extra time just thinking about layer hens and thinking about eggs and thinking about researching it, just to make sure that, I really did have to give them up. And so I kind of just knew a little bit more about them from the very start. And then when I started thinking about the book, immediately it was going to be chickens. But then I realized that it was actually they were a great foil in my book, because they were great protagonists. They were great everything, because people don't respect them very much. They're not, and they have a very deep history of their downfall, like from they started out as being very celebrated animals at the beginning of history, and now they're not. And what happened is interesting and could be integrated into the book. Also, people laugh about chickens like they're funny, and so the challenge of letting people laugh at them, but as the book goes on, having people have more and more sympathy for them until finally they're like horrified that they're laughing at them, but they're still laughing, but they're also feeling affection, like that was a really fun thing to play with, as characters in my book. Also just like chickens, like there's so many of them. So it was like such a challenge to think about how do you write about this huge community, like it was just, there were so many interesting things when it came to writing about them. So.
They are, yeah, but I can see how they would be a great choice as a foil for the book. I mean, it's Eleanor, who everyone who watches these videos will see at the start of she does a little piece at the start of each video, has kept chickens now for a number of years that she rescues ex-commercial lairheads, and gives them a sort of half decent retirement, and they're tremendously sort of sassy animals. Actually, they have great personality, and it did make for a very rich community of characters, effectively, in the book. Obviously, one of the themes which has been a spur for you, and which one can't help but consider along with it, is the impact of factory farming, not only on animal welfare but also on climate change. And we've seen artists and celebrities discuss this too. I'm thinking particularly of the sort of fairly recent "We're All Animals" campaign with Joaquin Phoenix being photographed with a hen. Do you think literature and the wider arts community can be an equally effective voice to that of the world of science when it comes to affecting changes in attitude towards our environment?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're all integrated. It's all about us sharing this planet and how that's going to work. I feel like the model for so long has just been, we dominate and destroy anything we want. We own everything. We own even the water and the sky, and we own certainly every animal. And I mean, and that model is not working. It's not working for scientific reasons. It's not working for moral reasons. It's not good for us psychologically. Like, it's just not working for so many reasons. And so I feel like animal liberation and science and taking care of our environment are all intertwined. So.
And you think that it's our artistic expressions need to reflect that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that artistically we need to reflect what's happening now in whatever sort of sci-fi way we want to, or non-sci-fi way we want to, and also like point to what this could lead to, will lead to, what are different ways to think, what are different ways to view the world. I mean, that's always kind of been the role of art. So it's exciting to see different people trying different ways to express that.
In terms of the technical approach to the book, there are some interesting sort of linguistic approaches in it. The father is never named. The farmer's baby described as or referred to as chickadee, and a slightly unnerving echo to the animals he's exploiting, and this very visceral phrase of carpet pulling to describe the removal of dead hens from the cages. What motivates your choices when you're deciding your own phraseology for each work?
Well, I mean, I was raised to think carefully about words as a philosophy major. So most of my work is really interested in like everything that there can be about words. Like all the titles of my books are thinking carefully about the varied meanings of individual words, like barn, like all the different ways that you can think about barn. And I think I explore that in the book, right? Where I think about a barn as this habitat, but also as a prison, and also as something that we're all in some way here on planet Earth, or as a country. Like barn is boundary, but it's also protection. And vacation, my book Vacation, just thought about, what is a vacation? Like what does vacation mean? It means to vacate, like to leave where you are. But then it doesn't really talk about the destination. The word vacation doesn't really contain destination within it, or revolution. Like, there's inner revolution and outer revolution, all different. So in all different ways, I'm always trying to think in like a cubist way about individual words. And that definitely comes from my philosophical background. And then I also like the sound of words, and how they sound next to each other. I was very influenced by people who studied with Gordon Lish, who was an editor in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, who was really interested in the percussive use of sound on the page. And so it just kind of, I don't really think about it that much anymore, but you can see the traces of it all over my work, that I was very interested in that for a long time. And so that's in there. And then, yeah, I like throwing all kinds of curveballs into, I think I teach a lot about having words that change the whole meaning of the sentence in there, or what I call shining words that disrupt whatever's happening on the page. And it can just be one word in a sentence. So I focus on that a lot in my teaching and in my writing, and just in the way that I think.
I had when I was reading it, I almost read it. It has quite a sort of gritty cinematic quality to it. It was a book that I read almost as though my experience of reading it, although I was sitting looking at words on a page, it was as though I was hearing it. It was a very sort of audio. It was a multi-sensory experience, really. And your work in terms of dialogue is excellent. Have you ever considered writing for the stage or writing for performance, in terms of where sort of live performance, where the impact of those words can be even more visceral?
That's nice of you to say. I would kind of like to try it sometime. I haven't. But I think it would be fun. Like, I think it would be, I would need someone to kind of give me a few pointers to get myself started. But I do think it would be fun. This book is being optioned by the UK. It's being optioned in UK by Fox Searchlight.
Searchlight, yeah.
But I'm not writing anything.
I was going to ask. I knew that Eleanor had said to me that it had been she'd heard it had been optioned, but I was going to ask whether you were planning to write the screenplay if it comes to it.
Yeah, I'm not writing it. They didn't ask me to write it, which is fine, because that would be hard to start with that. But no, I don't know why I haven't. I think I've been afraid. I think I've just been doing all the things that I sort of planned to do, and I haven't, but maybe soon, maybe next.
Yes, who knows? Well, I look forward to finding out more as time goes on. The book itself was it was quite a period in the making. What, if anything, made your journey as an author different with regard to Barn 8 than perhaps some of your other longer form works?
It did take a lot longer to write this one. but I will also say that I kept quitting and just like I published 2 other books while I was writing this one, and I just kept giving up because it just seemed too hard. I didn't really know very much about the egg industry or about chickens, so I had to do literally years of research, and which was exciting. And I ended up publishing several pieces that were just about that research. And so, but then that would get me distracted, because then I would be doing so much research and I'd be writing these other pieces. And, so all of these things just kept stopping me. But also, I think that the book ended up much better because of the fact that it took me so long, because there would be stubborn spots that I would just give up. And then I would come back a year later and be like, well, okay, let's just have a look at this stupid book one more time. And then I would find new solutions. And also the world changed. Like I spent 8 years writing it. So it was like I changed as a person as I was writing it. And because I wrote other books in between, like I learned about writing while I was doing it, like just a lot of things. I think the book really benefited from me taking so long with it, but I'm glad it's done.
You are, as well as being a novelist and memoirist and short story writer, you're also a prolific educator, not just as an associate professor of literature at the University of Texas, but also as a much lauded pioneer of literary education in prisons, which you've already mentioned, which we will come back to shortly. Certainly here in the UK, we've seen a huge deviation in public policy away from arts education to the benefit of STEM subjects, which is, for whatever rationale there may be for it, is also hugely frustrating for those of us that whose education is largely arts-based and who work in that sector. Do you have any fears for the future of the arts as an educational tool?
I mean, I do worry a little bit because there's a similar thing happening here, but at the same time, I believe deeply in the power of liberal arts education and, and the arts as a way to learn to think, to build empathy, to help you understand the world. I mean, I feel like it's, I can't imagine my life or the lives of anyone I know without the art that they paid attention to and thought about and studied and interacted with and created. I mean, it's just I'm a little bit afraid, but I also feel like it's just so essential. Like I don't even want to imagine the dark world that this would be without just art everywhere and so much a part of everything that we do.
I agree. You also live in Texas, which is a state that has been badly hit during the current pandemic. How has that affected your teaching work? And do you think that the college experience particularly can recover from the changes that have had to be made?
Man, I hope so. I mean, so yeah, we are basically still locked down. Are you guys still basically locked down?
We should be, but we have a government that has been prioritising the recovery of business rather than necessarily recovery of people. So they've just introduced some new, at the time of recording, they've just introduced this new rule of 6, whereby no one group of more than 6 people can meet at any given time, except for a number of exemptions, including basically you can't meet more than 6. You can't meet unless you are spending money, in which case it's fine.
Whoa, crazy. That's crazy.
It was also the big story today was that the government had asked the Cabinet Office, which oversees basically keeps track on all the different departments, and they had been asked to prepare an exemption, a special exemption, so that people could go grouse shooting in groups of more than six, which just seems a little bit, it unfortunately doesn't make the slightly aristocratic feel of the government here at the moment, doesn't make them seem any more relatable. So it's slightly heartening for me that although I'm not glad that you're all still locked down, it's heartening that at least where you are has taken a fairly sensible approach to things.
Oh, I didn't mean to give you that impression.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No one's being sensible. I mean, maybe individuals are like, we're basically locked down. The university is almost all online. There's some classes being held in person. But I think it's mostly individuals are making good choices. I think here in Texas, we're, mostly open in the sense that you're allowed to be open, but people aren't doing that. Like, there's not a lot of people out, and we are certainly, the university community is pretty locked down because because we're Democrats. I don't know. It's sad that that's what we've come to. No, I think it's been a really, really dark period in history all over the world, and Texas is definitely among that. I mean, now it's truly like being in the apocalypse with the fires on the West Coast and the orange sky, and the incredible flooding that we're having here in Texas, and the pandemic, and then our crazy government. I mean, it's just like, it's like living in the apocalypse, and maybe we are.
Well, perhaps. But if it should turn out that we aren't, what sort of future would you want to see emerge from the world we're in currently? I mean, I think we can probably guess what sort of future we'd like to see in the US after November. But generally, what sort of future would you like to see emerge from this now that we've all had to look this period in the face?
Well, would it be too much to ask for no more shooting parties? Like, that's one thing. As soon as you said it, that's the exemption, I'm like, great, that's the exemption. I think, what kind of future would I like to see? I mean, it seems like any future that I would ask for is completely untenable. I don't think that we're gonna become better people. I don't think that we're gonna turn around and do the right thing. I don't think that we might try to figure out some ways to stay alive on this planet. Whether it be ways to reduce carbon emissions. There might be things like that are happening that will keep some people alive on the planet, but I don't think that we're going to enter an age where everyone stops eating meat, and everyone is is like just more kinder, loving people who welcome immigrants and who try to create an equal society for all. I think that is just we have never lived that way as humans. We will never live that way. It's just a matter of time, unfortunately.
But looking at the short term in terms of how people's lives can be affected by the work that you do, you, as we've already mentioned, you work with maximum security prisoners, teaching creative writing through your Penn City Writers program, which has been very rightly applauded, and you've, I believe, received an award from the governor for that. In fact, my colleague Eleanor has alluded to similarities that she's seen between your program and the world that Margaret Atwood has created in her book Hagseed, which your thoughts are welcome on that if you've read it. I don't know if you have. But do you feel that the creative arts have the power to redeem and rehabilitate? And do the inmates that you work with find comfort in the creative process?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I haven't read that book, but thanks for that recommendation, because I love Margaret Atwood. So I'm gonna look at that book. I do think that art has the ability to change lives and rehabilitate and transform how we see the world, and helps us see others. Like, that's really important, to help us see others, to see how other people think, and like what their dreams are. And so all of those things are really, really urgent. The people who are incarcerated, for them, it is a comfort, but also it's like they want to learn how to write. Like, they want to learn skills. It's not just about like self-expression. And in fact, when I first started teaching at the prison, they got a little bit mad at me, because that's what I was kind of approaching it as, a sort of like a self-esteem builder, like we all share our work, and they were like, well, that's all well and good, but we want to learn how to write. Like, we want to be able to write to our kids who are on the outside. Like, we want to be able to write to our lawyers and make sense. Like, we want to be able to try to get like girlfriends from in here by writing love letters. And, so they had really practical reasons as well as emotional reasons. But also, the more that I got to know them, I realized that it was about them learning how to find learning how to be able to use their voices. Like, so much has been taken from them. This is a maximum security prison, so they mostly have sentences of like 60 years. They're in there, 35 years is a short sentence. And so they have to create lives there, and so much has been taken from them, their entire worlds, their families, their homes, and any dreams that they might have had. And so this is all they have. Like, they have their voices, they have their minds. No one can take that from them. And so what they choose to do with that is very freeing.
Yeah.
And so for them to be reading, we have our own library there, and they're required to read from the library, and they're actually matched to different people all around the world who are reading those books with them, and they write letters back and forth about them.
Oh, that's
And so
amazing.
it's beautiful. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And so for them to be, learning how to write, and then using their voices to tell their own stories and to create stories about prison life or anything, like sci-fi, whatever it is. And then, to be able to publish those stories or share them with their families, and then to read books that tell them their own history, like we have, students who are reading like Malcolm X for the first time, and like Frederick Douglass and Toni Morrison, for the first time. And it's amazing to watch them just like grow. They just grow, and they even like stand taller, and they talk louder. And I mean, it's totally beautiful.
Have you had, particularly with regard to, I think it's marvelous that that you've developed this program the way you have, and that people are being taught their own history. And that, have you hit up against any obstacles from the administration of the prison to, I suppose, the more sort of culturally awakening reading that they're doing and writing that they're doing, or are you finding great support from within the administration of the prison?
I would say that support is a strong word.
Okay.
It kind of depends. I mean, I think that when the incarcerated people are engaged in worthwhile projects that are helping them not be angry and violent, that's a good thing, so they like that. Like, the programs are really important. Any programming is really important. At the same time, I think that religious programming is something that they really approve of, because it's like, like, accept your lot, this kind of thing. Whereas I think that sometimes the educational programming can be a little bit threatening, like, like reading Malcolm X, for example. I mean, and I guess that they don't really want them writing a lot of negative things about the prison, but it's not pleasant, being in a maximum security prison in South Texas. There's no air conditioning. Like there's things that they could talk about that would be really devastating for the wider public to hear. So so I don't write about the prison, and I don't talk a lot about it. But the men can write whatever they want, and they can publish whatever they want. So, and no one can stop them from doing that. But also, I mean, I do appreciate that the administration has let me come for so long. I mean, they have been pretty supportive overall.
Well, long may it continue. If you yourself were, whether incarcerated or certainly, I had initially put it down as what would be your desert island book. But if you were on your own somewhere and could only read what was available to you, what would you choose to read?
Oh, geez, that's so hard. I mean, I guess one thing I would like would be the most updated editions of those like giant like Norton anthologies that have like whole novels in them and tons of poetry and tons of work by all kinds of people, so that I would have a really nice collection. I feel like I could read Toni Morrison books so many times and always be learning more. So that I would love a collection of all the Toni Morrison novels.
The question I hadn't put down, but which I think, having talked so much about various aspects of your own education, who would be your desert island philosopher?
Probably maybe either Wittgenstein or Kierkegaard.
We finish off every interview with it's our own little nod of the cap to James Lipton, who ran Inside the Actors Studio, which was broadcast for 20 odd years and who sadly died earlier this year. And he would finish every interview with the same 10 questions that he asked every subject. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to round things off with that. What is your favourite word?
Henry. It's my dog. Can it not be it can't be a proper name?
No, it can be. It can be. It's whatever word speaks
Okay.
to you. Is that Henry who I think who I saw briefly earlier in the interview? And what's your least favourite word?
My least favorite word. Geez, that's pretty tough. Trump.
What excites you?
A really good hike.
And what completely turns you off?
Geez, these are hard questions. What completely turns me off? I would say a bad sitcom.
What sound or noise do you love?
Birds.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
Machinery.
Do you have a favourite swear word? We aren't censoring this, so you are able to say if you do.
Oh, fuck.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Botanist.
And what profession would you absolutely never want to do?
Politician.
Whatever your beliefs may have been in life, if when your time comes, you open your eyes the far side of it and discover that heaven actually does exist, what would you like to hear said to you on arrival?
You get to stay.
Deb Olin Unferth, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much. This was so delightful.
Our pleasure entirely.